full roll call?
Yep, let's go for it. I don't see Bob yet for the panel, but hopefully he can make it in the next 10 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Great. Hey, everyone. I'd like to call to order the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District Water Resources Advisory Committee, also known as WRAC. I'm Andy Pease. I'm the serving currently as the chair. And we'll go ahead and get rolling. And Brendan, if you could call her out on roll to and establish quorum.
Sure. I'm going to read off the members that I see here, members and alternates that I see present. And if you don't hear your name and you're a member or alternate member, please speak up when I'm done. So I see Alan Duckworth for District 5. I've got Christine, Eric, and David for Environmental at Large. Linda Chipping and Kevin Piper from Coastal San Luis RCD. George Kendall for Upper Salinas RCD. County Farm Bureau, I've got both Steve and Brent. I see Mark from Golden State Water. I don't see Joshua. I see Steve from Shannon San Juan and Lee from Estrella El Pomar Creston. Andy, I've got you for City of SLO. I didn't see any other city reps when I was looking. I've got Ray for Cambria CSD, Ron for Los Osos CSD, Ed, Napomo CSD, Shirley, Oceano CSD, Charles Grace for San Simeon CSD, and Deborah Logan for Templeton CSD. If you're a member or alternate and didn't hear your name, would you let me know?
Brendan, I'm a newbie. My name is Claire Momberger, and I'm from County Planning.
Thanks, Claire.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So,
I'm not
Andy, with that, I've got,
any...
yeah, 17.
Yeah, 17. Great. Thank you. Great. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Is there, and welcome, Claire. Is there anybody else who hasn't been called already who'd like to introduce themselves and say hi?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Daniel De La Rosa from San Simeon CSD.
Great. Thanks.
And John Cass, San Simeon CSD.
And are either of you the alternate for Charles? I show that as a vacant.
Not at this time.
Not at this time. Okay, thank you. Thanks for being here. Anybody else?
Tom Bergman, South County resident.
Thanks, Tom.
Patricia Wilmore, Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance.
Okay. Okay. Great.
And Andy, this is Heather Bill. Sorry. Hi, Andy. This is Heather Billing. Engineering consultant at Provost and Pritchard.
All right, Heather Billing. Thank you. No, it's a little chaotic the way we do this big group to do on Zoom. So, but we like to keep it open so everybody can chime in as needed. Anybody else? And with that in mind, if you're anyplace noisy, if you want to stay on mute, and then also as you speak and want to be on camera, that's helpful for our conversation. All right. The first item that we need to do is make sure that we can continue our meeting. So we need to consider adopting a resolution regarding virtual meetings. This is because of AB 361, which allows us to meet virtually, continue meeting virtually as long as we have certain findings. Brendan, do you want to introduce the item?
Sure. I think on the surface, it's fairly self-explanatory. We were able to meet virtually through a governor's executive order that.
¿Todo está cerrado? ¿Cómo vamos a llegar?
Daniel? Daniel, could you mute, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
So we had been able to meet virtually. The governor had suspended parts of the Brown Act and other meeting requirements, as many of you know from your agencies and organizations. However, that expired on September 30th. So, however, before that September 30th expiration, the governor signed into law AB 361, which does allow for meeting virtually for legislative bodies. And what we have to do and what our county council has advised is that all committees and legislative bodies that follow the Brown Act adopt their own resolution acknowledging AB 361, and that, you know, for example, here that we have to declare that the state of emergency is still in effect, which it is, and that meeting in person would present imminent risk to health or safety of attendees. And we've used the CDC, I don't know exactly what they call it, a community transition metric to quantify that. And so this resolution would allow us to continue to meet virtually. And I think if we don't pass this resolution, then the meeting has to end. And we will, so I didn't clarify that with council, but I think that's what it means. That's why we have it at the beginning. So each kind of committee is on their own for this regard at the county level. And so this will be online for 30 days. And so really for us, this is something we'd have to do at the top of every meeting moving forward until we want to meet in person again, or when the executive order ends.
Great, thank you. Questions or a motion? Christine?
Yes, not a question, but a comment. I know that this might be difficult for some people. For me, it's a matter of safety, and I brought this up at our last meeting. I asked if we could find some way that we could continue meeting virtually, and the governor has allowed us that. I again apologize for those for whom it's not ideal. For some of us, it is ideal. And with that, I move that we approve and adopt this resolution.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I second.
Sorry, was that Stephen? Okay, thanks, Steve.
Great, thanks. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Brendan, can I do a voice vote, or does this need a roll call? Do you know?
I don't have any instruction about that. I think we could do a voice vote.
All right, so we're going to do a voice vote for all voting members. If you could unmute, and we'll do the ayes, and then I'll ask for noes, and then we'll, if we need to do a count, we'll do that separately. All in favor of being able to continue meeting virtually, please say aye.
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 Excellent. Any noes? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is the approval of the last meeting minutes, which were September 1st, 2021. Any comments on the meeting minutes? Christine?
Yes, thank you.
And then David. Sorry, go ahead, Christine.
I appreciate the minutes, but I have a question if there's any possibility of making some slight changes to the way we write our minutes. Frequently in the minutes, someone asks a question, a member asks a question, and then we're told who responded, but we have no sense of the response. Now, I don't think that the minutes need to have the full conversation on there, but if there could be one or two sentences or even a yes or no on that sort of question added to the minutes, it certainly would clarify it for anybody in the public who might want to understand what we're talking about and what some of the information is. And I just think it might be a better format for our minutes if anyone's interested in that.
Comment noted. Thank you. David?
I was going to say exactly the same thing. I want to know whether M. Bandoff told me to sit down and shut up or gave his usual wonderful answer.
Right. I think we are, honestly, we're working on a balance of time and nuance. So I think that, you know, if there is a quick and factual statement that could be added, I think that's totally appropriate. But otherwise, I think that folks, these are recorded and people will just need to circle back and hear the longer answers. And that's just, you know, the trend of all of the organizations that we're seeing in terms of minutes. All right, thank you. But comment noted. If there's an easy answer, then we can add that in. All right, anything else? And otherwise, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Move the minutes be approved as presented.
Thank you, Christine. Is there a second?
Steve will second.
Steve Sinton seconds. And we'll do a similar voice vote here. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Sorry, I know this is super awkward with our group, but I'm glad we're all getting through it. Whew. Okay, and now main course, super excited. We're having a panel discussion earlier in the year when we were planning out for WRAC for the fall, and we thought we should focus on drought. And originally it's like, okay, that'll be our September meeting, but of course, the more we get into it, the more we realize how many different things there are to talk about. And so last meeting was more of our urban and agency uses, and today we are focusing on drought and agriculture, and we have some fabulous guests joining me, and our outstanding secretary, who seems like a funny title, but that is Secretary Organizer Extraordinaire Brendan Clark is going to introduce our team and moderate our panel.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Andy. So continuing with our drought series, we've got the ag focus, and I'm really excited. I think we have a diverse panel today, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. But real quickly, we have Jerry Rutiz from Rutiz Farms, Seth Scribner, Slow Cattlemen's Association, Bob Schiebelhut, and Edna Valley Vintner and Grower, and Steve Carter, who's our WRAC member from the Slow County Farm Bureau. And so I'll start it off with Jerry. If you could just please introduce yourself and your role in agriculture and any history with water.
Yeah, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, my name's Jerry Rutiz. I farm 28 acres of mixed vegetables, flowers, and berries down in the Halcyon, Arroyo Grande area. And we get our water from the wells on the property. We have two wells that are sitting at about 150 feet. And that's, aside from rain, that's how we get our water. And do you want me to do more than that at this point, or wait till we have questions?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. A great way to start. Yeah. Seth, would you go to introduce yourself and your role in agriculture and any kind of water-related background history as an intro?
Yes, my name is Seth Scribner. We're cattle operators in the county. We operate in the southern part of the county, right at the lower extremes of San Luis Obispo County, as well as in San Luis Obispo and in the Shandon area. Primarily, it's dryland forage grazing, kind of out in the hills, so to speak. And water-wise, I'm also a civil engineer. Is kind of a background for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Seth. Bob, would you mind introducing yourself, your role in ag, and any history with water?
Yes, thank you. So I've been in the Edna Valley since 1985. First started out trying to placate 3 daughters with horses, and was able to escape that and ended up with some vineyards out here in the Edna Valley, and as well as a founder of Tolosa Winery. So the involvement with water has been both from a vineyard, and a winery point of view. All the water comes from groundwater out here in the Edna Valley thus far for us.
Awesome. And then lastly, Steve, go ahead and Steve Carter, go ahead and introduce yourself and your role in agriculture.
Yeah, good afternoon. So I came here in '89, started work as a vineyard manager for J. Lore Vineyards. We had 120 acres at that time and grown to 2,600 acres now. We have vineyards from San Miguel to the Adelaida district, all the way up to Highway 58. I also own a small, virtually dry farm vineyard in the Adelaida district. My wife and I own that, and we live in San Miguel. And I took advantage of the offset ordinance a couple of years ago and converted 45 acres from alfalfa to pistachios.
Awesome. Well, very cool. So for those who were part of our urban panel, I kind of had specific questions for different agencies. This is a little different, so I've got a set of questions I'll ask each of our panelists to kind of answer from their point of view. So I wanted to start back a little back in history. So going back to the last drought, 2013 to 2017, Jerry, how did that drought affect your business and maybe your sector of agriculture at large?
Well, we had to cut back our farmed acreage because we didn't, have as much water as we'd like to have had. The lack of rainfall really hurts one of my cropping techniques, which is green manure cover cropping, which is a crop that we would typically plant in late fall, and it has legumes in it, and then we'd let it grow, and the rain would make the crop grow well. And without the rain, we would have to supplement with sprinklers, which I was reluctant to do, not knowing for sure that we would have enough water to carry us through for the entire year on our main crops. So we're cut back on the amount of green manure cover cropping that we would have normally have had, and that's what we're seeing this year. Also, I'm a little bit nervous on, if we'll be able to continue to farm as much as we would like to have had going. Are we good there?
Yeah, thank you. Seth, same question, looking back at the last drought, how did that affect your business and your sector of agriculture at large with grazing?
So in grazing, the drought kind of affects us in two major ways. One, we're big reliers on precipitation, and that grows the forage crop that they will then consume through that green season and carry us over into the following year, as well as for actual drinking water for the livestock. And in times of drought, such as now, last drought, when we don't have the precipitation, we end up then having to reduce in numbers out in the hills to kind of match what forage growth was there. And in some cases, as we get into these more severe droughts, the reduction becomes substantial to where large numbers of cows, which are kind of a long-term animal that we hold on to over years, we're forced to liquidate some of those to get down to a stocking capacity that's suitable based on the forage produced. And then in other instances, we might have forage and we're unable to utilize it, largely in part because maybe we're relying on springs or natural water out in the hills. And as that plays out, we might have the feed, but not necessarily have the drinking water for the cattle. And so in that 2013, 2017 drought, we saw a lot of producers cull their herds pretty severely, enabling them to get through.
All right, and Bob, looking back at the last drought, how did that affect your business and your sector of agriculture at large?
I think well, I can speak to the Etna Valley. I think that what the drought did is encouraged people to pretty drastically, or take some as drastic as they could, as drastic steps as they could. So when we have rule of thumbs, water consumption per acre for vineyard, or rule of thumb water consumption for wineries, so many gallons per gallon of wine produced. The response was up and down the valley to not do the high kinds of technology that we're employing today, but to go through and really make sure that we were conserving as much water as possible. One of the responses was to drill more wells. We historically have had good wells, but on one property where we have 500 acres of vineyard, we needed to add a well to keep up. But I don't think, unlike in the livestock, which was of course a pretty dramatic loss, I don't think there may have been some reduction. I was trying to think back, some reduction in tonnage, but not really. I think we sort of, in the Etna Valley, I think we got through that period pretty well.
All right, and Steve, same question for you about the last drought and how that affected your business and the sector as a whole.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I started here in '89, and that was a period of a 3 to 4 year drought.
Sure.
2000 to 2004 was also a drought, so we're kind of getting a recurring theme here. But in 13 to 17, on our own vineyards, as far as farming practices, we kind of followed Bob. We didn't drill any new wells, but we certainly managed all of our vineyards. We cut back, knowing that the vines would not do as well, no matter, with lack of irrigation, with lack of rainfall, they weren't going to do as well. We cut back our cropping expectations and the amount of water that we would normally apply. But probably the biggest effect on the Paso area, as far as our business goes, for the drought of 2013 to 17 was the urgency ordinance passed by the county. And that really, that urgency ordinance really made an artificial planting boom. As many landowners rushed to develop property before, perceiving the loss of irrigation rights. And that planting boom into where there wasn't really a market for the grapes really affected the business side of it. So there was a glut of grapes, the price went down, and unfortunately only another natural disaster, which was the fires up north and smoke taint destroying a lot of fruit up north, kind of rebalanced our industry down here.
Wow. Okay, and kind of on the heels of all of that, I'll ask each of you just what you're monitoring, if anything different, what concerns, you're monitoring for this current drought. And so I'll go backwards. Steve, I'll start with you. What concerns are you monitoring for this current drought?
Well, I would say pretty much the same thing where, we'll monitor the number. We probably have 24 different irrigation wells that we would monitor. We watch the water depth, the amounts that we're pumping from those wells. And so far, they've all looked good. But like I say, the vines don't do as well with irrigation. That water always contains some salts. And really, Mother Nature, we rely on rainfall to flush the salts out of the soil and to give us the kind of growth that we really want. So those are the things that we'll be monitoring right now.
Sure, and kind of as a follow-up, do you, if we have say just a below average rainfall year, are there plans or, kind of calculations that you would set out in motion for potential cutbacks, like you mentioned you'd had to do previously? And the analogy is like in urban areas, there are drought contingency plans that have set stages and things like that. So, you mentioned having to cut back, based on rainfall amounts. Are there triggers for you that you're keeping an eye out, certain inches of rain or not, that would trigger specific cutbacks, or is that something that's kind of you guys take kind of as it comes?
Well, with an operation as large as we have, you have to start pruning, and the pruning really is your first chance to set the next year's crop. And so we would probably start pruning normally, but if it looks like if we end up the year with a dry year, we could go back in and reduce the size of the crop that we've left by taking, for instance, taking off a cane off each vine, sending the crews back through and reducing the crop. There's ways to do that, and that would certainly be looked at. If we get another dry year as we had this past one.
And then one brief follow-up, when does that pruning season normally start for those who don't know?
Normally we start about the second week of December and finish up in probably the second week of March.
Okay, cool, well, thank you. Bob, what concerns are you monitoring for this current drought?
Water levels and water quality. Fortunately, the water quality seems to be really good, and the well levels we're dropping some, but now have regained. We've cut back as best we can and on water, and it's helped. So I think from year to year we actually are about even, which is somewhat encouraging. But because as Steve said, when you only have drip irrigation, without the nice rains that we would hope for that would really flush the soils, the size of the crop isn't what you'd like. So there's been an impact there. I would say that an interesting thing that's going on here in the Edna Valley, it turns out not just ourselves, but some other people planted vines in the early 90s, and we planted a chunk then and also in 98, and their natural lives have come and gone. And so we're in a replanting and continual replanting process. And the opportunity, when we planted in the early 90s, we planted rootstock, Steve would be familiar, Freedom and 10113 principally. They turn out to be the least efficient in drought. So all the replanting that we're doing is with 1103 Paulson, which is really efficient for drought. Based on what we can tell, will reduce our water consumption by 20 to 30% just by a change in rootstock. The other efficiency that can be achieved, and we are achieving it, is choosing better, more efficient emitters. So the replanting process here is it's not fun to replant because it costs a lot of money, but it certainly provided an opportunity to achieve some real water efficiencies.
Yeah, thanks. That's interesting. Seth, what concerns are you monitoring for this current drought?
A lot of our monitoring began clear back in March of this year. We were winding down with the grass growing season, and at that point we were starting to draw a picture of how severe things were looking. And kind of a quick recap of the cattle industry in this part of, or in San Luis Obispo County, most of us that run the cow-calf operation, which are the kind of the resident animals that are here on a year-round basis, they would calve in the fall right at this time of the year, and that cow would then raise that calf until next spring, or in this case last spring, when we that calf is then weaned from the animal, and that's kind of your harvest or marketing time of the year. And when we get into a drought situation, a lot of times that is moved up. Maybe a calf that might typically get weaned in May or June is getting weaned in March. And so we start to see some of our first kind of economical losses come at that point, at which time, and as was the case with this last spring, we then also reduce numbers kind of to what we feel is a satisfactory level to get us into the fall. And then we start this cycle again where once the cows have their calves, they become much harder to move, or your hands are a little more tied as what options you might have. And some concerns that we're monitoring as we get into a situation where we're feeding a lot of supplemental feed to those animals to help get us through where we lacked in native forages. Yeah, and in most cases, it's hay, and what might have been produced historically in the county with a lot of the grass forages is little or non-existent this year, and so we get very dependent on hay coming in from out of the area, which also has its own water problems and has risen drastically in price to help supplement us through the year.
Yeah, thank you. And Jerry, what concerns are you monitoring for this current drought?
Well, I'm looking at my the pumping, how much water we can get out of our wells right now, and we're down about 25% from 2 months ago. So we're dealing with less water, and the water that we are able to use to get out of the wells has a higher salt concentration in it. So it's kind of a catch-22 in that we have less water to work with. The water is saltier. So when we irrigate with saltier water, we need to put more water on to dilute the salts down, but really don't have the extra water to put down. So it becomes more challenging, and we just have to be a bit careful. We may, in the long run, adjust our cropping rotations and try to switch to things that maybe are a little bit more salt tolerant, and maybe items that don't require quite as much water. And then we're using drip tape, which saves us about 35% of the water on a particular crop by using drip irrigation as opposed to sprinklering. So we're just watching everything and hoping it'll rain this winter.
Yeah, of course. So kind of a similar question I asked Steve, do you have, for your farm, plans that you follow, that you maybe a certain level of rainfall or a certain well level, will trigger doing ABC, or is it kind of each situation is unique and you kind of solve them as they come?
Is that for me, Jerry?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we just kind of pretty much go by the seat of our pants, and we just kind of look at each day, each week. Luckily, this year has been cooler than normal right here along the coast where we are, so we haven't really had any big heat ups. And Andy, I like your cat. So the weather's been cool, which has been helping us, and we'll just kind of have to see how it all goes. Did I answer your question, Brendan?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know a lot of us on the urban side are used to, if A, B, C, then D, when it comes to these things. Like, if this level is here, then we have to go do this, and as, one of the reasons why I think we wanted to have, this panel is, their agriculture is, it's different. And we, so, yeah, that's why I wanted to ask. So no, thanks. So the next question, and Jerry, I'll start with you and I'll go around. And Bob touched on this a little bit, but Jerry, what practices are you using now to conserve water or to be more efficient?
Right. As I mentioned, we are using more drip irrigation, and that does save us about 35% of our water usage on, an individual crop. Also, PG&E has kind of thrown us a bit of a curveball here this year with their rates. They're trying to get us and everybody in the state to use less electricity during the evening hours. Mm-hmm. And in the past years, that the most expensive electricity for pumping the water was between noon and 6, and now they've changed that to 4 to 9 in the evenings. and that's difficult for us to do, because in the past we'd always at about 4 or 5 in the evening we'd start a long set of water and run it into the late night, and then we have timers on our wells that will shut off the water, at 1 or 2 in the morning. So we're able to run the wells at the less expensive pumping time for the electricity. Now, they want us to try not to use power between 4 and 9 in the evening. And for us along the coast here, it's challenging because during the middle of the day, we usually get a lot of wind, and trying to run sprinklers, in the middle of the day is kind of worthless, really. And the best time to run sprinklers is after 6 o'clock at night, between 6 and midnight. And PG&E doesn't really want us to use the electricity at those hours. So we're trying to figure all that out a bit. And so it's just kind of one thing after another, and just hope it rains a bit, because when we get rainwater, it's really pure water, and it helps to wash the salts out of the soil for us. And irrigation water just doesn't do the same thing when we are pumping it out of the ground, because it has fairly high salt content right now. So we're just hoping it'll rain.
Yeah, of course. Seth, are there any practices that you use to conserve water? I know this might be more of an irrigated crop question, but I'd ask you as well.
With livestock grazing out in the hills, their requirements are very non-negotiable, in the sense they're a living creature, and that cow's needs will change slightly with weather and time of the year, and maybe what cycle she is. If she's milking and raising a calf, and during the hotter times of the year, she'll be drinking more. But our hands are really tied as to what we can do. We can either provide that animal with its drinking water, or we're forced to move it somewhere else. So from a water conservation standpoint, we're really limited on what we can do outside of give the animals their naturally required amount of water that they need to survive.
Yeah, and is that amount of water just is that regulated at all? Like, is there a minimum you have to provide from some sort of regulation, or is it just I guess, is it regulated, I guess, is the real question.
It's not regulated. There's some rules of thumbs, like a cow raising a calf is probably going to drink around 20 gallons of water a day. And if she's during a hot time of the year, that requirement might go up, or as she gets into a cooler time of the year, and especially if it's during the green season, she'll be able to get some of that moisture or water concentration from the green feed itself. And then as you get into the smaller class of animals, proportionately, they require less water. And a cow might be able to survive off of less, but you'll start seeing some repercussions, just like if you're going through life or through a day and you're able to drink some water, but not the kind of water that your body wants. You're going to initially survive, but you'll start to suffer some other consequences as a result.
Awesome, thank you. And Bob, what practices are you using now to conserve water? And I know you already mentioned the replanting with more drought-tolerant, I think you said rootstock. So what else are you doing, if anything, to help be more efficient?
One of the things we've done with the existing vineyards is utilized more in-block valving, if you will. Just so if you for a minute can just picture, if they have a large block, say it's 30 or 40 acres, but it's on the hills and it's undulating, so it's going up and down. So if you're not going to get uniform distribution of water unless you properly valve that. And we had done it before originally, but we've come back and we've improved that. Also, as a side to the replanting, we've moved away from larger blocks to smaller blocks. So let's say you had a block that spanned 2 hills. Now what we would do is create 4 separate blocks. You know, one slope up, one slope down, one slope up, one slope down. Whereas before we would just have one continuous block because it's more efficient when it comes to tractors and things like that. But you know, obviously the biggest priority now is water, so anything to conserve water. The other thing that we've done is we've engaged the Cal Poly, the Irrigation Training and Research Center, to also help us come up with some better ways for to create uniform distribution. But the most important thing they're doing for us is the 2-year study. We've completed the first year, and the second year is to develop Edna Valley specific data for ET, evapotranspiration, and other data points. What we have is Cal Poly has access to data points throughout various places in California, but we really don't have anything specific to Edna Valley. And you know, each site is different in terms of ET and the stress for using on vines or whatever. So we're going to end up with it by the end of next year. A detailed, it'll be on all crops. It'll be row crops, citrus, vines, and I think that'll give us a lot of information to go forward and achieve, even a better efficiency.
Sure. And as a follow-up, at the risk of getting too technical, what will that ET data allow you to do? Like, how would that help you be more efficient?
It's and what we'll be able to do is come up with more specific delivery programs for block by block. The other thing will be timing. I think it's pretty clear that the ideal time to irrigate is during the evening. The largest intake is during the morning hours, but that's a problem if you're on a drip system, because it's hard to see if you have a break in a drip line or an emitter burst. You can see it during the daytime and you can immediately attend to it. So we've got some ideas. There's some kind of some sense. I think we're going to come up with some interesting ideas as to how to employ that, because I think that would also be a real step forward if we could end up out here. It wouldn't, I don't know if it would apply to row crops. I guess to the extent they're using drip, and there is some of that out here that could apply, but it would apply to the citrus and to the vineyards as well, I think.
All right. And Steve, what practices are you using now to conserve water or be more efficient?
Well, I'd like to say that like minds think alike. So we've got a number of best management practices we've been implementing with a number of our growers up here. We've had Mark Batney help us. We've had Cal Poly, scientists from Cal Poly, and also UC Davis. So like Bob said, we're using NDVI, which is either satellite or aerial images to look at our blocks, to identify different water holding capacities, and to tailor our drip systems so that we're not irrigating soil that doesn't need it. Just trying to better balance that out. We've also got a 3-year contract signed with Cal Poly, and they are going to go back and look at the evapotranspiration data for all the fields, using satellite data for all the fields from Paso Robles to just south of Salinas for 2019-20, and then also for this year. And that'll give us some idea by looking at the actual amount of evapotranspiration, the water is used. You can identify, your vineyards, the quality differences. You can pinpoint ones that are doing better or worse, and use that information to adjust your irrigation practices. So those are some of the best management practices that many of the growers here over the Paso Basin. But if I could go back and revisit, as far as plans that we've got, plans in the vineyard are one thing. Plans to look at benefiting the basin are another. And I think it's important that on WRAC that we talk about the blended water project that we've been probably working on hundreds and hundreds of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars have been spent, with the city of Paso Robles in order to utilize their recycled water and actually bring more water into the basin. And so by blended water, we're talking about using their tertiary treated water. They have a pipeline designed, and they're just waiting for state revolving fund money to push that water under the Salinas River and to the east side of Paso Robles. And we've been working with them for over 3 years to develop a plan where we could utilize some of that water, blend it with Nacimiento water. Both of these waters are available to the Paso Basin, and they are just going down to the Salinas River right now. So we've are looking at having a shovel-ready project that would include the design, all the environmental studies. It have all the easements, permits, the contracts with the purveyors and contracts with the users, have that ready to go, so that the minute that Paso Robles starts their pipeline, we can start to utilize that water. So that's one of the major plans that we're using, that we're trying to implement to bring water where there isn't any, and take the emphasis on pumping groundwater in an area of the basin, that is overextended right now.
All right, thanks, Steve. Andy, I was just going to say, there's 2 more. I don't know if you wanted to jump in or not. So.
Yeah, well, I think I know great. It's just such great information that we're hearing so far, and I know we only have maybe 10 or so minutes left, and so before you ask the follow-up questions, I wanted to open up to the rest of WRAC members to see if you want to jump in with any questions. I see David. Go ahead, David.
Hi, this is particularly to Steve. I noted that you got rid of alfalfa, which is obviously water hungry, but you put in pistachios. And one of the big issues in Central Valley agriculture is that pistachios are an obligation. That is, it doesn't matter what's going on, they're going to have to be fed with water. And I imagine that also would apply to any new plantings of grapes in the vineyards. So are you thinking of future versatility, where permanent crops that have an obligation to you to keep watering could be moved back into perhaps annual row crops or something like that? Or are you going to be stuck with these things, even though the Sigma Basin is telling you the water is still going down and the whole basin's in trouble? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I did take, obviously I took into account when I changed, and the water use factors for alfalfa are something like 4.5 to 5 acre feet per acre per year. And with tree crops, it's supposed to be in the 3.5. So I thought I was making a savings in doing that. Also, in the number of years that I've been developing the orchard, I think I'm going to use 5 acre feet total on the 45 acres this year. I think I used 3 last year. As the trees, obviously, as they get larger, there'll be a greater need for irrigation. But no, there's certainly an issue there, and Sigma is going to start calling the shots, which is why I'm also very interested in this idea of bringing some extra water, some water that we have that's a possible available to us. And in the Sigma plan, the blended water project is one of the only plans that's really feasible that's written into that plan right now.
Thank you. I have a question. I recently went to a webinar about regenerative agriculture, and which generally consisted of using compost tea, having a living ground cover, a no-till approach, integrating livestock into a rotation, no artificial pesticides, that kind of approach. And they had studies in the Central Valley of almond trees, which ended up using, I think it was 6 times the water. They were able to, cut it by 6. It was 6 times more efficient to be able to use this method in terms of the utilization of water. That's what I'm trying to say. So, so I was pretty excited about that, and I know that there's just a lot of practices already happening here, and so I'm wondering if any of our speakers want to chime in on what you think of regenerative agriculture as a concept. Are we already doing it, or do you think that there is some potential in our area to get those benefits of the healthy soils, both from water, but also that's, has increased carbon uptake for those healthy soils, and of course the utilization of compost, which is a growing need in California. Throw that open to whoever wants to take it on.
Well, I'll jump in. We are doing an experiment with the state on utilization of compost in a portion of our vineyards, and that experiment is a 2-year experiment. We're finishing the experiment this spring, and then we'll know the results of that. In terms of cover crops, yeah, you remind me that it was that prior drought, 2000, the earlier one in 2013-17. That's when we started to really utilize, as I recall, cover crops is one of the answers. So I think I think it's really worth looking at. I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of like, I think we need all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're just, well, at least I'm just learning about water. I mean, I've learned so much in the last 2 or 3 years, and there's so much going on. There's so much research right now, and we just need to keep at it. One of the things that I was wondering about is, when you take a winery, you got a lot of hoses in a winery. And I know that we were able, by just taking the simple step of doing the right kinds of nozzles on every hose. I mean, we had the right kind of nozzles on some of our hoses, but then in the last drought, we put nozzles on every hose, and it really reduced. It's just, you don't think about it, but somebody's over here and he didn't turn it off, and he's going to come right back. And in the meantime, got a gallon or 2 gallons. So I was thinking that maybe, I'm not sure if it's the Farm Bureau or maybe it's under Mark, I'm sharing, or maybe it's part of the Sigma for the various basins, but it might be nice, if you had Tolosa has an idea or two on a winery, and Chomasol has an idea or two, and Jerry Lohr does. And it's kind of a list, just a list of things that you can look at, not mandated, but just things that, hey, you all want to reduce water? Well, hey, how about something as simple as putting a nozzle on every hose? I mean, that's not rocket science, but it really made a difference. And maybe, like what Steve is doing a number of things up in North County, Jerry Laurel guys, we're doing some things, and maybe we end up with like a cheat sheet. Maybe it's a 1-page cheat sheet. It'd just be a bullet point. Here are some things to really consider. That'd be universally helpful.
Great idea, thanks. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, Andy, this is Steve Carter. I would say, we've been early adopters of certainly cover crops in our vineyards from the early 90s. We have what are classified as highly erodible soils up here. So just to prevent erosion, and certainly for dust control in the summer, we love cover crops. They make the vineyards look beautiful. They're easier to manage. They're much less expensive than going out and disking and that type of thing. And I think Mark Batney did his master's thesis on cover crops in vineyards, so he'd be better man than me to tell you. But it also adds to the infiltration of water in our soils when we do get rain. But in the spring, when the cover crop is growing, you have to let it go to seed. These are winter grasses that dry out during the summer. When they go to seed, they do use water too, so they do take water out of the system. So there is that cost that we have to pay, but we try to mow them down very low so that, like your lawn, it's not using a lot of moisture before it goes to seed. As far as using stock in the vineyards, it's a very good idea, but there's not as Seth could tell you, there's not just extra stock running around for several months of the year. I mean, there's a certain number that are available throughout the state. And we've had them come in and graze our vineyards in the wintertime, but they can't be in there in the summer because they'd be very fat sheep indeed. I'll tell you that right now. So.
Gary, did you want to comment on that, or are you good?
Oh, I'm pretty good.
Okay.
You know, just the idea, Andy, is, you know, we get our water inadvertently from Lopez Lake, and it comes down the Rio Grande Creek and then percolates back into the water, into the aquifer, and then we pump it out. I know that the cities, the 5 cities area, have been trying to get together and get a recycled water project going, where they will take the water from the water treatment plants down here in South County and pump it up the valley and then inject it into the groundwater system. And I think that would, if we could get that project off the ground and going, that would help us a lot, all the farmers in the lower Grande Valley anyhow.
Thanks. All right, Brendan, back to you.
Well, yeah, we're just about at the end, of our time. Yeah. So I would just, I'd ask each panelist if there's anything else they'd like to add for our WRAC committee. So Jerry, is there anything else you'd like to add for us?
I think we all need to get out there and do a rain dance this winter. Okay, and let's be optimists that we're gonna get at least average rainfall. Keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, and thanks, Jerry, and thanks for being a part of today. Seth, is there anything you'd like to add for us, or you'd like us to know about your industry?
Well, thank you for having us on and kind of listen to us a little bit on the elements that we have to deal with when it comes to drought and drought planning. So thank you.
Awesome. And then Bob, anything you'd like to add?
Just scanning the board with the names, there's a lot of collective knowledge here and skill. And so if any of you have an idea that might help, maybe an idea on how to better do nighttime drip irrigation or what have you, just send a message over to bob@tolosawinery.com. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks for being a part of today. I know busy day for you. And Steve, lastly, anything you'd like to add for our discussion before we move on?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, farmers are very sharing and open people, and then us in the wine industry, you know, we kind of thrive on good publicity and everything like that. And if I know it's your last question, you know, if people do have more questions or they'd like to come out and see specific things, you know, we'd certainly welcome them to come out and be happy to show them around and to give them better idea. We've done that, you know, for 30 years here, and we certainly welcome that kind of thing. So you're welcome to contact me anytime. But also, if you go through the different trade organizations, I'm sure in the Valley and the Paso Wine Country Alliance, the Farm Bureau, that we could put you in touch with, you know, people that would share your same interest and could enlighten you a little bit about what they do on a day-to-day deal.
Thank you. All right, Andy.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panel for sharing that, and thanks for the offer to participate further. And I think that there is some opportunity to, I think WRAC and our partners have a lot of connection with, it's pretty far reach. It's a diverse group, and I think that we could find some ways to be sharing information. So thank you, everyone there. And yes, a couple of folks have noted the challenges of ag, and so thank you for growing our food and our wine. I'm always grateful for that. Any other comments on this item before we move forward from WRAC members? Want to chime in or next steps?
I was wondering if Brendan would send out an email with a contact email address for each of our speakers.
That'd be a great idea. So Linda Tipping asking if we could have some contact information for these folks for follow-up. So if you don't want your information sent out, let Brendan know right away.
Yeah, I'll check in maybe with them. But yeah, I can send out for anyone who'd like to be contacted. So for sure.
Great. Thank you. All right. Our next item is we are on a, oh, sorry, I almost skipped ahead here. We're going to receive an update from staff regarding the San Simeon Community Services District, the Prop 1 IRWM grant, and consider actions. So Brendan, man of many hats, if you could introduce this item.
Sure, yeah. Definitely much different than our previous item. And so a bit of a shift here. So we have our IRWM program, and you know, it's a countywide program that's run by the Flood Control and Water Conservation District is the lead agency. And this is all spelled out in our program MOU, which I did attach to the staff report. And based on this MOU, when the lead agency is going to bring a significant decision point to the Board of Supervisors, the MOU says we come to the WRAC first. The WRAC's not obligated to, I guess, make a recommendation or to, you know, take a vote on an item, but I do need to come before you to let you know what's going on and what staff is thinking. So with that, in 2000 and I'll provide some background on why we got here and status of their project, some of the constraints that staff is seeing, and what our recommendation is. So quickly, in 2019, San Simeon CSD was included in our IRWM grant application for their reservoir expansion project. This is the phase 1 distribution system, so tank and water line up there for the community. And as part of our $3.2 million grant award, in 2020, San Simeon CSD was awarded $500,000 from that grant. A few months later, after this grant was awarded, the Flood Control District received an inquiry letter from DWR to look into 2 past received grants from for San Simeon, as well as the just awarded Prop 1 grant in regards to some public complaints that DWR had received. And that is still ongoing, but part of that process is why we're here today. The Prop 1 Round 1 grant agreement was completed earlier this year, and San Simeon was assigned a placeholder status, which I'll explain here in a minute. But essentially, the other awardees of that project, which included Napomo CSD, Los Osos, Oceano, and the City of SLO, were included in the agreement as a regular project that you know, can invoice and be reimbursed, where San Simeon, this placeholder status means they could not receive reimbursement at this time. So they essentially remain as awarded today, currently. So the reason why we're here today is that during our exploration and response and investigation from DWR's inquiry to us, we found significant differences between the current status of the project and what San Simeon CSD claimed and put in their application. And so first is that the project is proposed to be located on non-district, non-CSD property. And in their application, they had a letter of intent, a negotiating document with this landowner, the Hearst Corporation. However, since that time, that letter and negotiating document has expired and has not been re-upped. And so where there was negotiations and communication with the landowner about the project location, that's no longer the case. And so we consider this a regression for access of the easement, which is a requirement to have in place before you could be reimbursed. and be added to the agreement as a reimbursable project. Additionally, design is on hold. The design contract has expired, and the project has not completed its design yet, nor has it completed its permitting. And lastly, which is also just as important, there is a significant funding gap between the total cost of the project and the grant award, which is, I believe, $1.3 million is the difference. And in the application, the CSD said they would be seeking a USDA loan or grants to cover this funding gap, and to date, they have not secured that additional funding. And so now, as a placeholder project, the CSD does have until December 2022 to finalize all of these things. However, staff sees a risk in this, these past 2 years. This has been the progression of the project, and the agreement states that placeholder projects that fail to complete their permits and CEQA and additional funding, easements, et cetera, in time will be deleted from the agreement. The total grant award would be reduced by that amount, and replacement projects are not allowed, and the reduced amount would be made available to the funding area in a future funding round. And this is key for us because there is only one future funding round, and it's starting at the end of this year, in January of next year at the latest, based on what DWR is saying. So we see a programmatic risk in keeping San Simeon's project in this agreement at this time, and where if the project is removed, that $500,000 would go back to the pot, so to speak, for all county agencies, part of the IRWM program, to compete for. And that would be including San Simeon, so they could reapply. Obviously, their project scored high last time, but now the project is, as you said, on hold and not progressing, and in some places has regressed. And so county staff is taking this recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that the project be removed from the agreement and the funds be made back available to the entire county as a whole for this upcoming funding round. And that's why we're here today. And so removing the project now will enable these funds to be added back to our available grant award for this soon to be released round 2 funding opportunity. And so the consideration for WRAC is if WRAC would like to advise the board in support of staff's recommendation to remove the project from the grant agreement. And so that's my presentation. I'm sure there's questions. It's a lot of info, and I'd be happy to answer questions and go from there. And I'll just add that WRAC's not obligated to make a recommendation either way. So I just wanted to add that in there. And yeah, so I'll go ahead and open up to any questions.
Great, thank you so much. I know we have a few folks from San Simeon CSD. If anybody wants to weigh in, add commentary, we'll kind of take this all together in terms of questions and deliberation.
Andy, I would like to weigh in. This is Charlie Gray.
Great, Charlie, thank you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention to the group that there are active communications with the property owner. With the footnote, and it appears there's some in the staff report, and it appears there's some confusion because the letter of intent is actually in place, as long as San Simeon CSD was showing progress on the project since December 2019. That letter of intent is in place, but those are part of the communications with the property owner. And while the design is not is on hold, the design is actually at 95% complete. So it wouldn't take much more effort to get that design to 100%. Securing additional funding, of course, we're going to need to do that, and we have until for 2022, according to the grant schedule, to start construction. So there's time to put additional funding in place. And ultimately, the project schedule runs until December 2022. So, we need to get the easement done. There's permitting that needs to be done. But a direct focus could bring the project back on track. That said, I understand that countywide, the money is a valuable asset, and San Simeon CSD would certainly appreciate the opportunity to continue to apply for grants in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Anyone else have a comment?
I have a question.
What question?
Yes, Eric Greening here with a question.
Thank you.
And I guess I'd like to hear both from the district and from the staff, the county staff, to get a full picture on this. To what extent is this project to address current needs as opposed to projected future needs based on decisions not yet made?
This is Gwen Callis, I'm chairperson on the CSD board. It's an immediate need because of aging infrastructure and a very small tank. The tank is only designed to survive 50 years, and we are either at that or now over it. And what brought the increase to the project is when we were deciding what to do as far as tank size, the fire marshal came out. And the fire marshal told us that in this point in time, we have zero fire protection. So not only do we need it to have it for drinking water, we also need it for fire protection. And there was a fire hydrant that was run into that drained, and it severely impacted the water that we had. So it's not like we have a lot. And in all honesty, the district will have to find a way to move forward on this, regardless of whether we get the grant or not, because it's that urgent of a need. So it's not for future. It's got nothing to do with the growth at the current time. It's just simply we need to be able to store more water, and we desperately need fire protection. It came to us really obviously when the 2016 chimney fire, you could see the flames on the hill from Highway 1. So, and we've also, we just have to do it. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. The cost increase was because at the time that we were scheduling this, we were doing it in phases. Phase 1 was just to install the actual first tank, lay the concrete for a second tank, and bring pipes down the hill. And then Mr. Kruzak, who's one of our local residents, said that that would not provide fire safety for us. So what we ended up by having to do to get the additional pipes and the industrial fire hydrants was pull phase 2 into the project, which of course upped the price. That's why there's a discrepancy between what was originally decided and where we're at now. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. That definitely helps. And if you did not get the grant, you would still try to move forward with the project. And do you have ways of doing that? Do you have a plan B?
We would end up by having like possibly a USDA loan or some kind of a loan with a low interest rate, and then have to look at increasing revenue.
Meaning a Prop 218 vote, I would presume.
Exactly.
Thank
Which
you.
is not something that we want to do, but it's necessary for us to have the water and especially the fire protection. So
Thank you for clarifying the situation and the choices.
Thank you.
Are you open to public comments now?
Yes. Well, let's see. Is that Hank?
Yes.
Hold on. Let me grab David Chipping first, and then I'll circle back to you.
Very good.
Okay, it seemed from the county's presentation that there was an issue in regard to an easement with the Hearst Corporation. In hearing the presentation from the CSD, I thought I heard a hint that that is not in place, that they're working on it. Is that a critical issue? And is it true that Hearst is truly engaged and this is just a breakdown, a temporary breakdown in process? Or is this more alienated than we might think between CSD and Hearst?
No, we're definitely not alienated between the CSD and Hearst. We've always had a good working relationship with them, and we continue to do so. I understand that there has been tremendous amount of rumors put around to say that it's adversarial, but that is not correct. Charles Grace is in contact with them on a regular basis, and I'm sorry, but what you've heard is incorrect.
Yeah, this is Stevenson. Part of the issue is tied up in the conservation easement on the Hearst Ranch, and that's this tank would go on the property. And my recollection is that the Rangeland Trust was willing to approve the tank if it were cited to be less visible from Highway 1. So that may have slowed things down a bit.
We did redo the. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We did, the plans were redone, and I do believe that the tank is now, the design was changed to make it wider and shorter. So there is no issue as far as line of sight, not from the castle or Highway 1 or just about anywhere else.
Thank you, Gwen. Hank.
Okay. Thank you. I'm a resident of San Simeon. And first of all, I wanted to thank the efforts of the county staff, including Brendan Clark, John Diodati, County Council, and the others that were involved in this demanding investigation of nearly a year long into the San Simeon Prop 1 grant, Round 1 grant. The project remains important to our community, as has been expressed here. However, the integrity of grant programs must be respected. As the investigation found, this project failed in multiple ways to meet minimum grant requirements after 3 years, including the use of disadvantaged community funds for engineering work. I'll give you a couple of examples since you brought up the Hearst easement. That is serious. The Hearst easement work has pretty much ceased as of last year because the district is pushing back on a portion of the conservation easement land, saying that the district actually owns it. It's a very small area, but the district is now adamant, despite her survey, and the district is now, after many months of doing nothing, has finally run a survey to counter that. We don't have the results. I'm sure Chair Kellis will present it at next week's board meeting, or I hope she does. But so we have some real issues with Hearst because now the district is, and not saying it's not a relationship, it's not an adversarial relationship. It's just that the district is saying it owns part of the conservation land, which is serious because CRT is involved in the Wildlife Conservation Board that bond funded a lot of this, and I live right near that, very near that conservation easement. But all that said, they're stalled out until this encroachment of an earlier grant project is resolved. Hearst will not work on an easement, not even begin work on an easement for the water tank project until this encroachment on Hearst property is resolved. And the district is saying it actually owns that land or potentially owns it. They just ran a survey. We don't have the results. So that's one serious area that Brendan pointed out. It's unfortunate that Brendan and the county started this investigation almost a year ago, and the district has done very little to nothing to advance this project. Until Brendan put this report on the table and issued it to DWR and to the district, almost nothing has been done this year. The county gave our community almost a year to get an easement going, to proceed with the permitting and the other work, and nothing happened. And now all of a sudden, oh yeah, we're going to jump right on it. Well, that's the problem. Nothing has changed. And nothing was done over the last year. And that's not being mentioned here. And that's part of the reason. I mean, and the grant integrity process, The grant process integrity itself is in question here when you allow things like this to go on. Okay. Last, I'm sure Chair Kellis will have counters. I am a whistleblower, as probably some of you have read in the paper recently with the district attorney's office. So there's more going on here, but conducting these kind of investigations is difficult. But as a resident, no other conclusion can be drawn. County staff's recommendation must be supported. The district has to get all of this done and get back in the queue again for funding. And yes, I agree. It was one of my pet projects years ago, and to watch this occur and be so poorly managed and executed over the last few years. And of course, Chair Kellis will counter that. And I don't know who Charles Grace is anymore. If he's their general manager or not, they won't say. But it's been a bad scene. I'm sorry for that. Sorry having to bring the county down with all this work and everything else. It's really unfortunate and very harmful to our community. Thank you. And Chair Kellis can counter everything I said.
Thank you. And then we're kind of moving towards wrapping this up, but I do want to
Andy?
give one last chance.
Andy?
Yes.
This is Shirley from OCSD.
Sorry, thanks. Yep.
And I want to support removing the funds from San Simeon and put them back in the pot, so to speak.
Okay, that sounds like a motion.
Yes.
Okay, is there a second for the motion to support staff's recommendation?
I'll second.
Christine will second. Is there any further deliberation on this item?
I question for Brendan Clark, if the money were put back in the pot, is there a sense that there are other projects of equal urgency toward which the money might go? And is there a sense that the San Simeon district does have other options, even if they require a 218 vote?
I'm going to pass on that second question. I don't have a sense, and I think they answered it, about their project, because we're coming at this from a county-wide angle and running a program. As far as your first question, I do believe there are other projects, and we'll have a call for projects specific to the grant when those guidelines come out. And frankly, based on comments from the first time or from the last time we did a grant round, we're going to invite. My plan was to invite WRAC to hear from all those project submittals, so WRAC could weigh in on the application as well, based on comments that this committee provided last time. So,
and presumably San Simeon could be part of that round if they had the issues resolved at that time, so that they would still have an opportunity for the grant. Is that my understanding?
Correct. This decision wouldn't affect future decisions. As it's kind of been alluded to, there are other things going on, but none of those things are complete. That's why we've, in my presentation, has stayed away from things that are unfinished or incomplete and focused on the project. But there seems to be quite a bit of things going on up there. But if they are eligible at the time, their application could be considered.
Thank you. Just a comment that I remember when the conservation easement on the Hearst property was being negotiated, it was at that time the issue that had received the most public comment of any in front of the Coastal Commission up to that time. So there is obviously a tremendous public interest in upholding the terms of that easement. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other deliberation before we have a vote on this item? All right. I'm going to start with a voice vote, and if it looks mixed, then we'll go to a roll call vote. So motion to support staff recommendation. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
And any opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
I wish to abstain.
Thank you. All right, motion carries by voice vote. Not taken lightly. I really appreciate everyone for being here, and I hope it does come together in some kind of great way. We're going to go to the next item. I'm going to turn over to Ray to finish the meeting. I've got the GSC for Edna Valley starting in 2 minutes. I would like to say that the next item for Tom Burhan as an alternate member that I worked with Tom just a little bit and was really impressed by his research and reasonable approach to be able to solve our real world regional issues on water. So I'll let Ray take that and run through the ongoing updates. And then the other one is just that we finally sent out a survey to all WRAC members. It only has 3 questions. It'll like literally take you a minute and a half, but it's a good chance for us to get a little bit of feedback on future topics and future meeting format. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ray. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
So, so the consideration today for this item number 6 is for considering Tom Burnham's application for selection to be included in the WRAC. First of all, is there any comment from? I believe Tom Burnham is present. Does Tom, do you wish to make any comments, or otherwise I can open it up to public comment?
I will. I'll be quite brief, and I just appreciate the opportunity. You know, I'm interested in a sustainable future for all water users in the county. I realize there's a lot of challenges in different geographical areas. My wife and I, we live out near Waza on a small ranch that we're planting native oaks and native plants to try and restore what was grazing land. We also have a few citrus trees and avocados for our own use. I realize that I have quite a lot to learn, and I'm willing to listen and heed the advice of those who have noodled over some of these issues, probably some of you for decades. So again, I welcome the opportunity to serve should the WRAC decide to support my nomination to the Board of Supervisors. And I'll take any questions that people have.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And does anyone have any questions for Tom, or does anyone have any comment? Christine.
Yes, thank you. Hello, Tom. I'm Christine Mulholland. I have not met you. I do not know you, but I am one of the environmental representatives on this committee, and looking at your background with Southern California Edison, a bachelor in economics. You have some qualifications, you say, versed in environmental and public policy, but I'm wondering why, other than being a member of the Nature Conservancy and the Audubon, you consider yourself qualified to serve as in one of the environmental seats when there are so many other various opportunities and agencies and positions to be filled on occasion, and why what you could say to bolster your environmental creds, and why, as an environmentalist and one on the seat here, I should support you.
Okay, fair question. You know, I don't necessarily fit into any of the other categories for the WRAC, even though I do own ag property. I don't grow crops commercially, and so I didn't feel I fit into those slots. I think I've had an abiding interest in the environment ever since I was a teenager. I have hiked California extensively, including several hundred nights out in the Sierra. I have a love of nature. I believe in win-win solutions for the environment as well as human uses. I think The fact that, you know, well, I think I will leave it at that. I'm not sure I could convince you that I have die-hard environmental credentials as far as serving on committees in various environmental organizations, but I know where my heart is, and my heart is with the environment.
I have a very specific question. Given your background with Southern California Edison, do you have a leaning relative to the case between the Samuel Lawrence Foundation and the Coastal Commission relative to the waste storage at San Onofre? And what is your interpretation of that issue?
You know, I'm not that, I left Edison 6 years ago, and I did not deal with the nuclear operations that much. So I have to admit I'm not familiar with that particular case. I think that the waste needs to be stored as safely as possible. Obviously, the best solution for San Onofre and Diablo is to remove the waste away from the coast. Right now, that's not possible because there is no federal repository. The one that was planned at Yucca Mountain, as you're probably well aware, is not going to open. So the only choice the plant operators have at this point in time is to store the waste on site. That is, in my mind, a suboptimal solution. You can do a lot to try and make it as safe as possible, but yet you're still just close to the ocean. So I think it'd be best if it could be moved somewhere else.
Thank you. So you weren't particularly associated with any of the nuclear decision making or whatever is what you're saying. And certainly, yeah, there isn't a safe place to take it, and there isn't a safe way to get it there. I think the case with the Samuel Lawrence Foundation is that it's basically at sea level in dented canisters right now, and they would at least like to have it moved uphill a little bit on the property, but I would leave that to them. Anyway, I was just interested when I saw Southern California Edison in your background, but yes.
I understand, and you know, just to put it in perspective, most of my work at Edison was work on electric vehicle, making our system so we could charge vehicles in homes back in the early 90s, one of the earliest programs. And also I did a lot of work on the permitting of power lines that are now in place to deliver solar and wind energy from areas like the Tehachapi's.
Thank you. And what factors did you consider relative to the permitting? In other words, obviously there are impacts relative to the placement of these lines. What sorts of things did you consider? I have not heard the terrible case against Southern California Edison that I have heard against PG&E relative to the starting of fires, but obviously there are all sorts of biological impacts and so on. Did you give those full consideration?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We had to go through full CEQA and NEPA review. We'd often try to route our power lines into existing corridors so you wouldn't be adding power lines where there weren't there before. In some cases, we would underground them where that was feasible. That's a lot more expensive. And we try and minimize environmental issues, not going through wetlands. We certainly would never go through wilderness areas, so on and so forth. We would do all the issues with, making sure we didn't have any problems with harming streams or wetlands, so on and so forth.
Thank you.
All right, does anyone else have any questions or anyone? Yeah, it's David.
Yes, I'm one of the other environmental people. I was wondering, as an environmental person, of course, you're meant to be representing the environmental side on WRAC. And at the moment, for example, in the Central Valley, there's this conflict between ag running out of water and saying that water that goes down into the delta is wasted. You see signs all over there. So you might say on one side is the economics of the existing industrial and human base, and the other side is nature. And I will be hoping that you will be siding on the nature side on something like this as one of the environmental voices. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Certainly, and I just finished reading Mark Arax's book, The Dreamt Land, which if you haven't read it, is a wonderful read. And, you know, I think we have to take care of our natural systems first. I think you have to use wise use of the water for agriculture. I think what has happened with the groundwater in the Central Valley is a tragedy. I hope by serving on the committee, we can avoid something similar happening in the areas of our county. We have to, you know, I think that's the role of government, is to, when you have overuse of a common resource, whether it's groundwater or air or anything else, you have to set limits. And then you let those who are using the water, in this case, agriculture or other uses, determine how to best use their allotments. I don't think you want to tell people you can't grow a certain crop. You just say you're allowed to use this amount of water, and you are very clever. I saw today on the meeting, these are very clever and very thoughtful people. You let them figure out how they're going to use the amount that they're allowed to have.
Thank you. I think you're hearing from all of the three environmental principles, and if I'm not mistaken, you'd be my alternate. So one final question. Just my own personal sense of the job of the environmental rep is to represent interests that are not otherwise at the table, specifically other species and future generations of humans. Would you consider that as central to your task if you took this on?
Yes, and I believe that's why I said at the beginning of my remarks, talking about a sustainable future for all water users. That includes wildlife habitat protection, as well as the future human race.
Thank you.
Okay, so does anyone want to make a motion for Tom Burnham's recommendation?
Yes, this is Shirley.
If you like, if it would be, sorry to interrupt, if you like.
Oh,
I'm sorry, this is Tom Burhan. I'm happy to sign off if you prefer to have the conversation without me.
No, you could stay on, Tom. Okay.
All right, very good.
This is Shirley with OCSD, and I make a motion that we approve the application of Mr. Burnham for alternate member of Environmental at Large.
And David Chipping will second.
Okay. So first by Shirley Gibson and a second by David Chipping. And Brendan, can you call the vote, please? A voice vote.
Sure. We'll do a voice vote, and then we can go from there if we need to. All in support, you can say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstentions? All right.
Welcome, Tom Burhan. Well, we don't know yet
Motion
because it's
carries.
up to the Board of Supervisors, but potentially welcome.
Yeah, so November 16th is the board date.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be November 16th at this point. Yeah, I don't think I could make the second.
I was told it might be the December meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, November 16th.
But thank you, everyone. I'm humbled.
You're welcome to sit in on the November meeting as a member of the public and get to know us better.
All right, thank you.
All
Thank
right,
you, Tom.
very good.
All right, let's move on to item number 7, ongoing updates. Let's move on to that. Rain and reservoir report. Any comments on that? How about the California Drought Monitor summary? Any further comments other than what's already on the attached report? How about in the groundwater management efforts? Any comments on that?
Just to highlight that the Groundwater Sustainability Commission for Slow Basin is meeting right now. So when this is done, if anyone's interested, they could hop over. I believe they're meeting to recommend adoption of the plan by all the agencies. So,
okay.
I would like to comment on the slow groundwater basin. Andy has already read my comments. I am among those who are not in support of the GSP as proposed at this time for a variety of reasons. Former Supervisor David Blakely did a beautiful analysis, point by point, policy by policy. I followed up with my comments. Peg Pinard, former mayor of San Luis Obispo, has written extensive comments, and some other people in the public also have chimed in. Well, we're very concerned about some of the suggestions and how to balance that basin, who's going to end up paying for it. Those who should and those who shouldn't be paying for it do not look balanced in our minds. And so I will not be going to the meeting, but I understand that the board of supervisors and the city council are going to have to approve whatever, or certainly look at, and they'll be asked for their approval of the basin plan. I think it really stinks, personally.
Okay, well, thanks for your comment, Christine. So any other comments on that? Otherwise, we can move on to, is there any comments on the IRWM portion?
I would just add for our urban and agency members, DWR just released the draft guidelines for another drought-related program. So there's a drought-related funding program specific to small systems, and now there are draft guidelines for a funding program for all, so small and large water systems specific for drought projects. I have a link in the staff report, or you can feel free to reach out to me and I'll get you all the information that I know about those opportunities.
Thanks, Brendan. Okay, how about the stormwater resource plan? Any comments or questions on that? Okay, how about various county water programs, policies, and ordinances? Any comments or questions on that, other than wants to highlight what's in the packet? Okay, well, let's go ahead and close that item. Let's move on to item number 8 for future agenda items. Other than what's already there in the agenda packet, Brendan, is there any further comments that you have on this? Or
yeah, I just want to highlight something Andy mentioned right before she left, and I did include it in the reminder email today, but Andy and I and Ray have put together a future agenda topics and WRAC related survey, 3 questions. I think we're going to keep it open for a few weeks, and we will discuss at the next meeting. So I will send out another link to that, and I would just appreciate everyone's input on future topics, meeting type, and any other comments for us as we plan these meetings. And then I also want to know, we are planning to not have a November 3rd meeting. So that's something we've got planned, is unless something specific comes up for us to discuss, we're planning on not having a November meeting, and we'll meet again in December. And so that's what I'd like to add.
Thank you, Brendan. Anyone else have any comments on future agenda items?
Yes, I do.
Thanks, Ed, go ahead.
I want to tell you I thought the Ag panel discussion today was a very helpful format in understanding different sectors and their needs, their status, and so forth. And I would recommend that you extend that and do it every meeting, have a different sector, like, for example, the counties, a county panel, a city panel, special districts panel. But I think gives us a lot of insight as to the water uses and needs of the various sectors. So I think that was very good, and I recommend you extend it.
I fully agree. And I think too that would also be very much of interest would be a building industry panel and then a nursery/landscaper panel. What plants are being offered for sale? What plants are, how can landscapes be made more resilient, more hospitable to percolation and so on? So anyway, I agree. It's an excellent format and certainly brings us up to speed and gives the people in the sectors impaneled a recognition that there's great interest in any efforts they make.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
Something we've discussed, again, Ray and Andy and I, is, and we have it written down here, the next panel we were thinking of was, kind of going to the, staying in the ag realm, but looking at what are the latest research technologies, pilot projects. So, asking in the University of California Cooperative Extension, Cal Poly, I mean, some of these groups were mentioned already today, but maybe asking them questions about the things they're looking at, things they've tried, what's worked, what's not worked, just, where are they at from a science, scientific approach. So that's some ideas we're kind of bouncing around for our next panel, and I definitely appreciate the feedback. I think it's been really informative as well.
Yes, agreed. All right. Anyone else have any other comments? Thank you for those. Anyone else have any comments on future agenda items? All right, well, let's move it on to item number 9, any public comments for items not on the agenda. Does anyone have any public comments out there, please? Okay, well, seeing none, I move to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for attending the WRAC for today, and we'll see you in December. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Everybody, nice.